Hi, I'm Dylan. I'm a junior here at Hume Fogg, and I'm in Integrated Math 3.
Hi, my name is Nalia. I am currently taking Integrated Math 3, and I am a junior at Hume Fogg.
Yo, I'm Malik Waters, and I'm in Calculus BC, and I'm here to quench your thirst. So let's get started. So, our first problem that we have is r squared plus 9r plus 18. All right, so when factoring, we want to keep some things in mind. We want to find two numbers that multiply to get this number here, but also add together to get this number right here. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and set up our parentheses. Additionally, you want to keep in mind that this is positive, so everything is going to be positive, so we can have this. All right, so let's look at this first thing. R squared. Well, let's ask ourselves, what two numbers multiply together to get r squared? Well, that's just r, because r times r is r squared. So let's look at this, because this is important. What two numbers multiply together to get 18? Well, let's make a list. We have 18 times 1, we have 9 times 2, and we have 6 times 3. However, with this in mind, we need to find, with these numbers that we've listed, we need to find a pair that have to add together to get 9r, or 9. So 18 plus 1, that's 19. That does not add together to get 9. 9 plus 2, that's 11. That does not add together to get 9. But 6 plus 3, that adds together to get 9. So we're just going to plug in this, 6 and 3. So our factor of r squared plus 9r plus 18 is r plus 6 times r plus 3.
Alright, so the problem we're going to be working on today is p squared plus 14p plus 48. So what I first look at is these two numbers right here. This is your sum, and then this is your product. So in context of this, we need to find what two numbers multiply to 48 and also add to 14. So let's first set up our parentheses. So since we're adding all the way, we're just going to put both plus signs in the parentheses. So first we need to multiply or find what two numbers multiply to p squared. So that's just p. So now we need to find what number multiplies to 48 but also adds to 14. So let's just list off the numbers that multiply to 48. So we've got 48 times 1, 24 times 2, 16 times 3, 12 times 4, and 6 times 8. So what two numbers both multiply to 48 and add to 14? Let's just go down the list. So 48 times 1. Does 48 and 1 add up to 14? No, it adds to 49. 24 times 2, that adds up to 26. 16 and 3, those two numbers add up to 19. 12 times 4, those two numbers add up to 16. We're close, but we're not quite there yet. Now 6 times 8, those two numbers do add up to 14. So we're just going to plug in those two numbers into the equation, and we have our factored function.
Okay, so our equation that we are trying to factor is b squared minus 8b plus 15. Now the first thing we can already write down is that we know that in both equations there will be b, due to the fact that b times b would get you b squared. So we can just go ahead and write that down. Another thing that we know is that both of the things that we're multiplying will be negative, due to the fact that while this is negative, this is positive, and a negative times a negative will get you a positive answer. So we can go ahead and have this also be negative. And now we need to figure out what multiplies to equal 15, but subtracts to equal 8. So we can go ahead and write that down. We have 1 and 15. Nothing times 2 equals 15. And we have 3 times 5. And we can already stop there since we know that negative 3 plus a negative 5 will equal a negative 8. So we can have one of these be negative 3, and the one be negative 5, and then we get our factored form of b squared minus 8b plus 15. It would be b minus 3 times b minus 5.
All right, so this function that we're going to be factoring is p squared minus 8p, oh, not b, p, sorry, rhymed, and that would be plus 7. All right, so when factoring, we want to keep two things in mind. We need to find two terms that multiply to get this term, but also add together to get this term. So let's go ahead and set up our parentheses. All right, so let's look at this. What two numbers multiply together to get p squared? Well, that's just p. So p and p. So now, when we have a negative and a positive sign, let's think about that. So we have this negative 8p and we have this plus 7p, plus 7. So we know that a negative times a negative is a positive. So keeping that in mind, these two signs need to be negative. All right, that being said, let's find the factors of 7. Well, we have 7 and 1. Look at that. Negative 7 and negative 1 multiply together to get negative 7. Well, positive 7, sorry. And then, but they also add together to get negative 8. So when we plug that in, we have p minus 7 times p minus 1, and that is our factored form of p squared minus 8p plus 7.
Okay, so the problem we're going to be working on today is n squared plus 10n plus 16. So let's first just go and set up our parentheses. Now, we have to look at this first term first, which is n squared, and then we can just separate that out into n and n, because n times n is n squared. So now we have to see what two numbers get 16, or multiply to get 16, and then what two numbers can also add to 10. So let's just list out what numbers can multiply to 16. So we've got 16 times 1, 8 times 2, and 4 times 4. Now let's just look at this first one. 16 times 1. 16 plus 1 adds to 17. 8 times 2, 8 plus 2 equals 10. Now that we've done that, we don't need this one anymore. So, since they're both positive, these two numbers are just going to be positive. So, plus 8 plus 2, and then there's our finished function. N plus 8 times n plus 2.
Alright, so our problem is k squared minus 4k minus 60. So first we need to figure out what adds to make negative 4 and what multiplies to make 60. So we're going to go through all of our factors. And we have 2 times 30, 3 times 20, 4 times 15, 5 times 12, and 6 times 10. And we know that since one of these is negative, and they're both negative, that means one of these numbers has to be negative. So in this case, we know the bigger one of the two would be negative due to the fact that this is also negative. And we know that negative 10 plus 6 equals negative 4. So our equation would be k plus 6 times k minus 10. And we already know that it will be k twice due to the fact that the only way you can get k squared is with k times k.
All right, so we're going to be factoring this equation here. B squared minus 9b plus 14. Let's go ahead and set up our parentheses. Let's look at this first term, b squared. Well, what two numbers multiply together to get b squared? Well, that's just b, because b times b is b squared. Now, let's look at this here term. What two numbers multiply together to get 14? Well, let's list them out. We have 14 times 1, and we have 7 times 2. But keep in mind, these here pairs have to somehow add together to get negative 9. Well, let's look here. This 14 plus 1 equal negative 9? No. Does negative 14 minus 1 equal negative 9? No. Well, let's look at this. 7 plus 2, well, that's 9, but we're trying to get negative 9. So it needs to be negative 7 minus 2, or negative 7 plus negative 2. So with that being said, we can go ahead and put these minus signs here. And that's our factored equation. B minus 7 times B minus 2.
Okay, so how I go about factoring is I first set up my parentheses and put the A term in there. And what I do next is look to see what two numbers can multiply to get the C term and what two numbers can add to get the B term. And if those two certain numbers do multiply to get the C term and add to get the B term, then that's where I put them into my parentheses.
So how do you figure out what numbers will add to the B term, and like how do you go about figuring out what numbers will multiply to the C term? What's your strategy?
Well, the first thing I do is list out all the factors for the C terms because it's easier to see if you have all the factors written out what could add or subtract to equal your B term. So that's normally what I do.
Thanks for watching.
Like and subscribe to keep up with more videos.
Ring that bell for notifications.
Yes.
And our product.
Okay, I gotta stop you. I'm sorry. I should have stopped first.
P squared. Oh, that does not work. Let's get one that works.